When a billion-dollar empire meets a mountain rescue at 14,000 feet, fate has a way of rewriting everything. She's a tech mogul who built an empire from nothing, soaring above the world in her private helicopter, until the unthinkable happens. He's a former search and rescue specialist turned single dad, living a quiet life in a mountain town, haunted by the one person he couldn't save. On a freezing November night, their worlds collide in the most unexpected way. What starts as a desperate fight against hypothermia becomes a journey neither of them saw coming. But here's the twist. This isn't the first time their paths have crossed. A forgotten act of kindness from years ago set everything in motion. And when the truth finally surfaces, it will change both of their lives forever. You won't believe how a single moment of courage can ripple across time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled through the pines surrounding the small cabin, nestled in the shadow of the Cascade Range. Its mournful cry, a familiar companion to Ryder Maxwell, as he stacked firewood on the porch. At 38, Ryder had learned to find peace in the rhythm of mountain life. The crack of splitting logs, the crackle of flames in the wood stove, the silence that stretched between dawn and dusk like a balm over old wounds. This November evening carried the bite of early winter, the kind that warned of snow by morning, and he worked steadily, his breath misting in the cold air. Ryder's hands, scarred and calloused from years of work, moved with practiced efficiency. He'd built this life deliberately, a modest existence in the town of Pine Summit, population 1,200, where he ran a small wilderness guide service and taught survival skills to tourists and locals alike. The cabin was simple. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, shelves lined with books about trekking and mountaineering, and a wall adorned with maps of the surrounding peaks. It was enough. It had to be. But the simplicity masked a complexity Ryder carried like a stone in his chest. 7 years ago, he'd been part of an elite search and rescue team, the kind that rappelled from helicopters into blizzards and plucked lost hikers from impossible ledges. He'd saved dozens of lives, earned commendations, and felt the rush of purpose that came with every successful mission. Then came the call that shattered everything. A climbing accident on Mount Terror, a team trapped by an avalanche, and among them, his younger brother, Daniel. Ryder had led the rescue. He'd reached the site first, his training overriding the panic that clawed at his throat. But Daniel was buried too deep, the snow too unstable. By the time they pulled him out, it was too late. The guilt had been immediate and absolute. Ryder replayed every decision. Should he have gone faster, dug differently, ignored protocol? The questions haunted him. And 6 months later, he'd walked away from search and rescue, unable to bear the weight of saving strangers when he'd failed the one person who mattered most. He'd moved to Pine Summit, a town far from the memories, and rebuilt himself around routines. Guide trips in summer, survival courses in fall, solitude in winter. He avoided deep connections, kept conversations surface level, and told himself the quiet was healing. But tonight, as he stacked the last log and looked out at the darkening forest, the quiet felt heavier than usual. Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee and pine. Ryder poured himself a cup, the bitter warmth grounding him, and settled into a worn armchair by the window. The radio on the shelf crackled with static, a weather report warning of an incoming storm system, winds gusting to 50 miles per hour by midnight. He made a mental note to cancel tomorrow's guided hike and reached for a book, but his gaze drifted to the framed photo on the mantel. It was Daniel, grinning in his climbing gear, his arms slung around Ryder's shoulders. taken 2 weeks before the accident. Ryder's throat tightened, and he looked away, the familiar ache settling in. He'd tried therapy, tried talking to the few friends who'd stuck around, but nothing eased the guilt. He'd saved lives before Daniel, and none since, convinced he'd lost the right to call himself a rescuer. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, and Ryder stood to check the latch. Outside, the forest swayed, branches bending under the gusts. The storm was coming early. He thought of the hikers who sometimes ignored warnings, the ones who underestimated the mountains, and a flicker of unease stirred. But he pushed it down. He wasn't that person anymore. He guided, he taught, he stayed safe. The days of racing into danger were over. He settled back into the chair, the book open but unread, and let the cabin's warmth wrap around him. Tomorrow would be another day of firewood, maybe some equipment maintenance, perhaps a visit to the town's general store for supplies. It was predictable, and predictability was what kept the memories at bay. But fate, as Ryder would soon learn, had other plans. Miles away, above the jagged peaks of the Cascades, a sleek black helicopter sliced through the twilight sky. Inside, Elise Porter sat in the leather passenger seat, her eyes on the tablet in her lap, fingers scrolling through emails with the practiced speed of someone who lived perpetually behind schedule. At 34, Elise was the CEO of Quantum Dynamics, a tech company she'd founded at 26 with nothing but a laptop, a ruthless work ethic, and an idea that revolutionized data encryption. 8 years later, she was worth $3 billion, her name synonymous with innovation and power. Tonight, she was flying from a board meeting in Seattle to her estate in Sun Valley, Idaho, a route she'd taken dozens of times. The helicopter was hers, a custom-built machine with every luxury, piloted by Greg, a veteran aviator she trusted implicitly. Normally, Elise would have stayed in Seattle, but she'd received word that a key investor was wavering, and she needed to be in Sun Valley by morning to salvage the deal. Time, as always, was money. She wore a tailored blazer over a cashmere sweater, her dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, diamond studs glinting in her ears. The cabin was warm, the hum of the rotors a white noise she'd learned to ignore. She typed a response to her CFO, her mind already 3 steps ahead, restructuring the pitch, anticipating objections, calculating risk. This was her world, controlled, efficient, relentless. But beneath the polish, Elise carried her own scars. She'd grown up in a trailer park outside Boise, the daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep them fed. Her mother, Rose, had been her hero. Tough, loving, fiercely determined that Elise would have a better life. Rose had died of a heart attack when Elise was 22, just as Elise was starting her company. The loss had been devastating, but Elise had channeled her grief into ambition, building Quantum Dynamics as a monument to her mother's sacrifices. Yet success had come with a cost. Elise had no close friends, no romantic partner, no time for anything beyond the next deal. She told herself it was worth it, that her mother would be proud, but in quiet moments, rare as they were, she felt the loneliness like a void. Tonight, as the helicopter climbed over the mountains, she felt it again, a whisper beneath the buzz of work. "Ms. Porter?" Greg's voice crackled over the headset, pulling her from her thoughts. "We've got some turbulence ahead. Storm system moving in faster than forecast. Might get bumpy." Elise glanced out the window. The sky had darkened, clouds roiling like a cauldron, and the peaks below were jagged silhouettes against the fading light. "How bad?" she asked, her tone calm. "Manageable," Greg said, though his voice carried a thread of concern. But if it worsens, we may need to reroute or land early. Elise nodded, returning to her tablet. She'd flown through worse. Greg was skilled, the helicopter state-of-the-art. She trusted the numbers, the engineering, the logic. Fear was for people who didn't prepare, and Elise Porter was always prepared. But as the helicopter pushed deeper into the storm, the wind began to howl. The first gust hit like a fist, slamming the helicopter sideways and jolting Elise hard against her seatbelt. Her tablet slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor, and she grabbed the armrest, her knuckles white. Outside, the storm had swallowed the twilight, plunging them into a roiling darkness lit only by brief flashes of lightning. "Greg?" she said, her voice sharper now, the calm cracking. "Hold on," he replied, his hands tight on the controls. The helicopter bucked again, the rotors straining against the wind. "We're in the worst of it. I'm trying to climb above." A deafening crack cut him off. Lightning struck somewhere close, the flash blinding, and the instruments on the panel flickered. Greg swore, his fingers flying over switches, but the helicopter lurched violently, the engine sputtering. Elise's stomach dropped as they began to fall, the world tilting sickeningly. "We're losing power," Greg shouted over the roar of wind and failing rotors. "I'm going to try for an emergency landing. Brace yourself." Elise's mind raced, her body frozen in terror. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd flown this route dozens of times. The helicopter was top of the line. But the numbers didn't matter now, not when the ground was rushing up through the storm, not when the rotors were spinning uselessly, not when Greg's face was pale with fear. The impact came suddenly. A bone-jarring crash that threw Elise forward, the seatbelt biting into her chest. Metal screamed as the helicopter hit the slope, skidding through snow and rock. The windshield shattered, icy air blasting in, and Elise's head slammed against the seat. Pain exploded behind her eyes, and then everything went black. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When she came to, the world was silent except for the wind. Her head throbbed, a warm trickle of blood running down her temple, and her body ached everywhere. She blinked, her vision swimming, and realized the helicopter was on its side, half buried in snow on a steep mountainside. The cabin was a wreck, shattered glass, twisted metal, the smell of fuel sharp in the air. "Greg," she croaked, turning her head. The pilot was slumped in his seat, unconscious, a gash on his forehead bleeding heavily. Panic surged, and Elise fumbled with her seatbelt, her fingers numb and clumsy. It took 3 tries before the buckle released, and she collapsed onto the side wall, now the floor, gasping. She had to get out. The fuel smell was getting stronger, and she didn't know if the helicopter would explode. She crawled toward the shattered windshield, her legs shaking, and pulled herself through the opening. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Below freezing, the wind cutting through her blazer and sweater like they were paper. Snow swirled around her, the storm still raging, and she stumbled a few feet from the wreckage before collapsing into the snow. Her mind screamed at her to move, to find shelter, but her body wouldn't respond. She was soaking wet from the snow, shivering uncontrollably, and the cold was seeping into her bones. Hypothermia. The word surfaced from some buried memory. A documentary she'd watched, a survival guide she'd skimmed. She had maybe an hour, maybe less. Elise tried to stand, but her legs buckled. She crawled a few more feet, her hands sinking into the snow, and then stopped, her strength gone. The wind howled, drowning out her ragged breathing, and she curled into herself, trying to conserve warmth. This couldn't be happening. She was Elise Porter, CEO of Quantum Dynamics, a woman who controlled boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. She didn't die on a mountain, but the cold didn't care about her resume. She thought of her mother, rose, and tears stung her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. I tried." The darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, and she let her eyes close, the fight draining out of her. Then, through the storm, a light flickered. Ryder Maxwell had heard the crash from his cabin, a distant boom that cut through the wind like a thunderclap. He'd been by the wood stove, stoking the fire, when the sound made him freeze. It was unmistakable. Something big, something catastrophic. His first instinct was to ignore it. He wasn't a rescuer anymore. That part of him had died with Daniel. But the sound echoed in his mind, and he found himself at the window, staring out into the storm. The crash had come from the upper slopes, maybe 2 miles northeast. Someone could be hurt. Someone could be dying. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. Not my problem. Call it in. Let someone else handle it. But even as the thoughts formed, he was moving, pulling on his heavy parka, grabbing his pack, always kept ready, a habit he'd never broken. He strapped on snowshoes, clipped a headlamp to his beanie, and grabbed his emergency med kit. The storm fought him every step. The wind threatened to knock him over, and the snow was already knee-deep. But Ryder pushed forward, his training overriding his reluctance. He'd plotted the crash site in his mind, using the sound and the terrain he knew by heart, and he moved with grim determination. It took him 40 minutes to reach the wreckage. The helicopter was a mangled ruin, tilted on the slope, its rotors bent and broken. Ryder's headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating shattered metal and scattered debris. He approached cautiously, checking for fire, for fuel leaks, for instability. The smell of aviation fuel was strong, but there was no flame. Yet. He circled the wreckage and found the pilot first, unconscious but breathing, his pulse weak. Ryder did a quick assessment. Head wound, possible concussion, stable for now. He'd need a medevac, but Ryder's radio crackled with static. The storm was jamming the signal. He'd have to get them both to safety first. Then he saw her. A figure in the snow 20 feet from the helicopter, curled into a ball. Ryder's heart kicked against his ribs. He ran, his snowshoes crunching, and dropped to his knees beside her. A woman, mid-30s, soaked through, her skin pale and lips tinged blue. Hypothermia, advanced stage. "Hey," he said, shaking her shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" No response. He checked her pulse. Faint, irregular. Her breathing was shallow. He had minutes, not hours. Ryder didn't hesitate. He stripped off his parka, wrapping it around her, then pulled a survival blanket from his pack, layering it over her. He scooped her into his arms. She was light, too light, and started back toward the cabin. The storm raged, and every step was a battle. But Ryder's mind was clear, focused. This was what he'd trained for. This was what he'd been good at. He didn't think about Daniel. He didn't think about the guilt. He thought only about getting her warm, getting her breathing, keeping her alive. The cabin appeared through the storm like a beacon, and Ryder kicked the door open, carrying her inside. He laid her by the wood stove, the heat already radiating, and began stripping off her wet clothes, replacing them with dry blankets from his bed. Her skin was ice cold, her pulse barely there. "Come on," he muttered, rubbing her hands, her arms, trying to stimulate circulation. "Don't you quit on me." Her eyes fluttered, and a faint moan escaped her lips. Ryder's breath caught. She was fighting. Good. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know why she'd been flying in a storm. But as he worked to save her life, something shifted inside him. A flicker of the man he used to be, the rescuer he thought he'd lost. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the cabin, warmth began to return. Elise woke to warmth and the smell of wood smoke. Her body ached, a deep, bone-level soreness that radiated from her core to her fingertips, and her head pounded with a dull throb. She blinked, her vision blurry, and tried to make sense of her surroundings. A low ceiling, rough-hewn beams, a flickering orange glow from a wood stove. She was lying on a couch, wrapped in thick blankets that smelled faintly of pine and something earthy. Sweat, maybe, or worn leather. Where am I? The last thing she remembered was the helicopter, the crash, the unbearable cold. She'd been crawling through snow, her body shutting down, and then nothing. Panic flared, and she tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed in protest. A hand appeared, gentle but firm, pressing her back down. "Easy," a voice said, low and steady. "You're safe. Don't move too fast." Elise turned her head, her vision clearing, and saw a man crouched beside the couch. He was maybe late 30s, with a weathered face, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His dark hair was tousled, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked by old scars. He held a mug of something steaming, and his expression was guarded but not unkind. "Who are you?" Elise's voice came out raspy, barely above a whisper. "Ryder Maxwell," he said, offering the mug. "You crashed about 2 miles from here. I brought you back to my cabin. You had hypothermia, severe. You're lucky to be alive." Elise took the mug with shaking hands, the warmth seeping into her palms. Tea, she realized, sweet and herbal. She sipped it, the liquid soothing her raw throat, and tried to process his words. Crashed, hypothermia, alive. "Greg," she said suddenly, her eyes widening. "The pilot, he was with me. Is he?" "He's alive," Ryder said, his tone measured. "I went back for him after I got you stabilized. He's in the other room, unconscious but breathing. Head wound, possible concussion. I've done what I can, but we need to get him to a hospital. Problem is, the storm knocked out communications. Radio's dead, cell towers are down. We're stuck until it clears." Elise stared at him, the reality sinking in. They were stranded, in a cabin, in the middle of a mountain storm, with a man she didn't know. Her instinct was to take control, to demand answers, to fix the situation. But her body was too weak, and the gratitude in her chest was stronger than her usual need to dominate. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life." Ryder's jaw tightened, and he looked away, standing abruptly. "Just did what needed doing. Finish the tea. You need to stay warm and hydrated." He walked to the wood stove, feeding it another log, and Elise watched him, her mind racing. He was gruff, clearly uncomfortable with her thanks, and there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of something unresolved. But he'd risked his life to save hers, trudging through a blizzard to pull her from the wreckage. That wasn't nothing. She sipped the tea, her strength slowly returning, and took in the cabin. It was small but well kept, everything in its place. Shelves lined with books about survival and mountaineering, a wall of maps, a rifle mounted above the door. No television, no computer, just the essentials. It was the home of someone who'd chosen simplicity, or maybe someone running from complexity. "What were you doing out there?" Ryder asked, breaking the silence. He didn't look at her, his focus on the fire. "Flying to Sun Valley," Elise said. Business meeting. The storm came out of nowhere. Storm was forecast, Ryder said, a hint of reproach in his voice. Anyone paying attention would have grounded their flight. Elise bristled, her defenses rising. I had a pilot. He knew what he was doing. Ryder turned, his gaze steady. And yet here you are. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Elise had been so focused on the meeting, on the deal, that she hadn't questioned Greg's assurances. She'd trusted the technology, the plan, and it had nearly killed her. I made a mistake, she admitted, her voice tight. I get that now. Ryder's expression softened slightly, and he nodded. Mountains don't forgive mistakes. But you're alive. That's what matters. They fell into silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space. Elise finished the tea and set the mug aside, her mind turning to Greg, to the company, to the chaos this would cause. Her phone was gone, lost in the crash, and without communication, she was cut off from everything. The thought was terrifying and oddly liberating. How long until the storm clears? She asked. Could be a day, could be 3, Ryder said. Depends on the system. I've got supplies, food, water, firewood. We'll be fine. Elise nodded, though the idea of being stuck here for days made her chest tighten. She was used to constant motion, to controlling every variable. This, being at the mercy of weather and a stranger, was foreign territory. What about you? She asked, deflecting. You live here alone? Ryder hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Run a guide service. Teach survival skills. Former military? Elise guessed, noting the precision in how he moved, the way he assessed everything. Search and rescue, Ryder said, his voice flat. Used to be, not anymore. There was a story there, Elise could tell. A wound as raw as her own. She wanted to press, to understand, but his tone warned her off. Instead, she asked, Why'd you stop? Ryder's gaze flicked to the mantel, where a photo sat in a simple frame. A younger man, grinning, his arm around Ryder's shoulders. Lost someone I couldn't save. Decided I was done. The admission hung in the air, heavy and unguarded. Elise saw the pain in his eyes, the guilt, and recognized it. She'd carried her own after her mother's death, the belief that she should have done more, noticed the signs, been there. It was a burden that never quite lifted. I'm sorry, she said softly. Ryder shrugged, turning back to the fire. Long time ago. But Elise knew better. Grief didn't follow timelines. It lived in the quiet moments, the what-ifs, the hollow spaces where love used to be. She shifted on the couch, pulling the blankets tighter. For what it's worth, you saved me. That counts for something. Ryder didn't respond, but his shoulders relaxed slightly, and Elise took it as acknowledgement. They were strangers thrown together by circumstance, 2 people carrying their own scars, and yet in this small cabin, surrounded by the storm, there was a fragile thread of connection beginning to form. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but inside, the fire burned steady. Elise closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under, and for the first time in years, she let go of the need to control. She was alive, and that was enough. Ryder watched her drift off, her breathing evening out, and felt a familiar ache in his chest. He'd sworn off rescues, convinced he'd lost the right. But tonight, carrying her through the storm, fighting to keep her alive, something had shifted. The guilt was still there, a shadow over Daniel's memory, but so was a flicker of purpose. He added another log to the fire and settled into the armchair, his gaze on the woman sleeping on his couch. He didn't know who she was beyond a name. Elise, she'd murmured when he'd asked. But he knew she was a fighter, and maybe, just maybe, helping her survive would be the first step toward forgiving himself. The storm raged on, but in the cabin, warmth and quiet hope took root. Morning arrived with a muted gray light filtering through the cabin's small windows, the storm still pressing against the walls with relentless fury. Elise woke slowly, her body stiff but warmer than it had been the night before. The wood stove crackled softly, and the smell of coffee drifted through the air, rich and earthy, a comfort she hadn't expected. She sat up carefully, testing her limbs. Everything ached, but the bone-deep cold was gone, replaced by a manageable soreness. The blankets fell away, and she realized she was wearing clothes that weren't hers, a thick flannel shirt, wool socks, sweatpants that were too long. Ryder's clothes. Her cheeks warmed at the thought of him undressing her, even clinically, to save her life. "You're up." Ryder's voice came from the kitchen area. Really just a counter with a propane stove and a few cabinets. He stood with his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 enamel mugs. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck," Elise admitted, her voice still raspy. "But better. Thank you for the clothes." Ryder turned, offering her a mug. "Hypothermia protocol. Had to get you out of the wet stuff. Your things are drying by the stove." Elise took the coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm metal. She met his gaze, searching for judgment or awkwardness, but found only matter-of-fact steadiness. This man had saved her life with the same practical efficiency he probably used to split firewood. No drama, no expectation of gratitude beyond basic acknowledgement. "How's Greg?" she asked. "Stable. Still unconscious, but his vitals are good. I've been checking on him every hour." Ryder gestured toward the back room. "He needs a hospital, but we're not going anywhere until this storm breaks." Elise nodded, sipping the coffee. It was strong, almost bitter, but exactly what she needed. "How long have storms like this lasted before?" "Longest I've seen was 4 days," Ryder said, leaning against the counter. "But usually they blow through in 1 or 2. We've got enough supplies either way." 4 days. The thought sent a spike of anxiety through Elise's chest. Her company, her meetings, the investor deal, all of it was slipping away while she sat trapped in a cabin. But her phone was gone, smashed in the crash, and without communication, there was nothing she could do. The powerlessness was foreign and unsettling. Ryder seemed to read her expression. "I know it's hard being stuck, but fighting the mountain won't change anything. Best thing you can do is rest, let your body heal." "I'm not good at resting," Elise admitted. "I've built my whole life around staying in motion." "What do you do?" Ryder asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. "I run a tech company, Quantum Dynamics. We specialize in data encryption and cybersecurity." She paused, watching for recognition, but his expression remained neutral. "We're worth about $3 billion. Ryder's eyebrows rose slightly. "Billionaire, huh? And you were flying in that storm for a meeting?" "An important one," Elise said defensively. "An investor was wavering. I needed to be there." "More important than your life?" Ryder's tone wasn't judgmental, just curious, and it made Elise falter. She looked down at her coffee. "I've spent the last 12 years building this company. It's everything I have. My mother died when I was 22, just as I was starting out. I built Quantum Dynamics in her memory to prove that her sacrifices weren't for nothing." Ryder was quiet for a moment and then said, "Sounds like you've been running from her loss, not honoring it." The words hit like a slap, and Elise's defenses flared. "You don't know anything about me. "You're right," Ryder said evenly. "But I know what running looks like. I've been doing it for 7 years." Elise's anger deflated, replaced by curiosity. "The person you lost, you said it was someone you couldn't save. What happened?" Ryder's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, setting his mug down. "My younger brother, Daniel. He was on a climbing expedition, got caught in an avalanche. I led the rescue team. We got to him, but not fast enough. He died in my arms." The raw pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Elise felt her throat constrict. "That wasn't your fault. Tell that to the part of me that replays every decision I made that day," Ryder said quietly. "I was trained for situations like that. I should have been faster, smarter, but I wasn't, and he paid the price. So I walked away. Figured if I couldn't save my own brother, I had no business saving anyone else." Elise set her mug down, her hands trembling slightly. "My mother worked herself to death so I could go to college. 2 jobs, no breaks, no complaints. She had a heart attack at 53. I was at a startup pitch meeting when it happened. By the time I got to the hospital, she was gone." Her voice cracked. "I've spent every day since trying to make it mean something, to build something big enough to justify her sacrifice. But it's never enough." Ryder crossed to the couch, sitting on the opposite end. "She wouldn't want you killing yourself to prove a point. And your brother wouldn't want you punishing yourself for something you couldn't control," Elise countered. They sat in silence, the weight of their shared grief settling between them. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the cabin, the air felt lighter, as if the confessions had cracked open a space for something new. "How'd you end up in Pine Summit?" Elise asked, breaking the quiet. "Needed distance from the old life. This place is quiet, remote. Figured I could disappear here, just guide some tourists, teach survival skills, stay out of trouble." He smiled faintly. "Clearly that plan's working great." Elise laughed, a sound that surprised her. "Well, I'm glad you were here, even if your plan to avoid rescues failed spectacularly." Ryder's smile widened. "Yeah, the universe has a sense of humor." Over the next few hours, they fell into an easy rhythm. Ryder showed Elise how to tend the wood stove, explaining the importance of airflow and log placement with the patience of a teacher. She proved a quick study, her analytical mind applying the same problem-solving skills she used in boardrooms to the task of keeping the fire alive. "You're good at this," Ryder observed as she adjusted a log with the poker. "I'm good at learning systems," Elise said. "Everything has a logic to it, even fire." "Not everything," Ryder said. "Some things you just feel." Elise glanced at him, struck by the simplicity of the statement. Her world was data, projections, quantifiable risk. But here, in this cabin, with the storm raging outside, she was beginning to understand the limits of logic. They made lunch together, canned soup and bread that Ryder toasted over the stove. It was simple, almost primitive, and Elise found herself savoring it in a way she never had with the gourmet meals at corporate dinners. They ate at the small wooden table, and Ryder told her about his guide service, the clients who came seeking adventure and left with respect for the mountains. "You ever miss it?" Elise asked. "The rescue work?" Ryder hesitated, his spoon pausing midair. "Sometimes. There was a rush to it, knowing you made a difference. But the guilt's louder than the nostalgia." "Maybe you need a new reason to do it," Elise suggested. "Not to replace what you lost, but to honor it." Ryder met her gaze, something shifting in his expression. "Maybe." As the afternoon wore on, Elise checked on Greg, relieved to find his breathing steady. Ryder had fashioned a makeshift bed in the second room, keeping him warm and monitoring his pulse. The care he showed, the quiet competence, impressed her. This was a man who knew how to save lives, even if he'd convinced himself otherwise. That evening, as the storm continued its assault, they sat by the fire, and Elise found herself talking about her mother. Stories she rarely shared, moments of joy and struggle that had shaped her. Ryder listened without interrupting, his presence a steady anchor. And when she finished, he shared memories of Daniel, the laughter and the loss woven together. "He would have liked you," Ryder said. "Daniel was always drawn to people who didn't quit." "Your mother would have liked you too," Elise replied. She believed in people who helped others, even when it cost them. The words hung between them, a bridge built from shared pain and tentative hope. The storm raged on, but in the cabin, warmth and connection took root, two souls finding solace in the most unexpected of places. The second morning dawned quieter, the wind's howl reduced to a low moan that suggested the storm was finally losing its grip. Elise woke to find Ryder already up, crouched by Greg's bedside in the back room. She padded over in her borrowed socks, peering around the doorframe. "How is he?" she asked softly. Ryder looked up, his expression cautiously optimistic. "Better. His eyes moved under the lids a few minutes ago. I think he's coming around." As if on cue, Greg groaned, his eyelids fluttering. Ryder leaned closer, his voice calm and steady. "Hey, Greg, can you hear me? You're safe. You were in a crash, but you're going to be okay." Greg's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he took in Ryder's face, the unfamiliar room. "Where?" he croaked, his voice barely audible. "A cabin in the mountains," Ryder explained. "I pulled you from the wreckage. You've been out for about 36 hours. You've got a head injury, but you're stable." Greg's gaze shifted to Elise, recognition dawning. "Miss Porter, you're alive." "Thanks to him," Elise said, nodding toward Ryder. "He saved both of us." Greg tried to sit up, but Ryder pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Easy. You need to rest. We'll get you to a hospital as soon as the storm clears and I can get a signal." Greg nodded weakly, his eyes closing again, but the tension in the room eased. He was conscious, coherent, a good sign. Elise felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly buckled her knees. They were going to make it. Later, as Ryder prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal and dried fruit, Elise stepped outside for the first time since the crash. The cold hit her immediately, sharp and bracing, but the storm had indeed weakened. Snowdrifts piled high against the cabin walls, and the forest was a wonderland of white, the trees heavy with fresh powder. The sky was still overcast, but breaks in the clouds hinted at blue beyond. She walked a few paces from the door, her breath misting, and looked out at the mountains. They were beautiful and terrifying, indifferent to human ambition or frailty. She thought of the helicopter, somewhere up there buried in snow, and shivered. She'd come so close to dying, and the realization settled over her like a second skin. Fragile, precious, finite. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ryder's voice came from behind her. He'd stepped out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Elise took one gratefully. "Beautiful and deadly." "That's the mountains," Ryder said, his gaze on the peaks. "They don't care who you are or what you've built. They just are." They stood in silence, sipping their coffee, and Elise felt a strange peace. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about the next meeting, the next deal, the next conquest. She was just here, alive, present. Can I ask you something? Ryder said, breaking the quiet. Sure. Why do you do it? The company, the relentless pace. What are you chasing? Elise considered the question, the answer rising from a place she rarely examined. Proof, I guess, that I mattered, that my mother's sacrifices weren't wasted. I grew up poor, Ryder. Trailer park poor. My mom sewed clothes for pennies, worked herself sick so I could have a chance. When she died, I felt like I owed her the world. So I built one. Ryder nodded slowly. And has it been enough? The question pierced her, and Elise's throat tightened. No, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It's never enough. I keep building, keep pushing, but the emptiness is still there. I thought success would fill it, but it just made the quiet louder. Ryder turned to face her, his gray eyes steady. Maybe you're looking in the wrong place. Your mom didn't sacrifice so you could be a billionaire. She sacrificed so you could be happy, live a life she couldn't. And from where I'm standing, you're not living. You're surviving. The words landed like a blow, not cruel but true, and Elise felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know how to stop, she confessed. It's all I know. Then learn something new, Ryder said gently. You're smart, driven. Put that energy into something that actually feeds you, not just the bottom line. Elise wiped her eyes, a shaky laugh escaping. You sound like a therapist. I sound like someone who learned the hard way, Ryder corrected. After Daniel died, I threw myself into isolation, convinced I didn't deserve connection or purpose. Took me years to realize I was just hiding. You don't have to do the same. They returned inside, the conversation lingering between them like a door cracked open. Elise couldn't shake his words, the idea that she'd been surviving instead of living. It resonated in a way nothing had in years. That afternoon, as the storm finally began to break, Ryder dug out an old photo album from a shelf. Thought you might want to see what this place looks like when it's not trying to kill you, he said with a faint smile. Elise flipped through the pages. Images of Pine Summit in summer, the peaks lush and green, families on guided hikes, riders standing with groups of grinning clients. But one photo stopped her cold. It was old, the colors faded, showing a younger rider in search and rescue gear standing beside a team. And there, in the background, was a woman, dark-haired, maybe early 20s, clutching a backpack and smiling at the camera. Elise's breath caught. The woman looked familiar, hauntingly so. She studied the image, her mind racing, and then it clicked. The shape of the face, the eyes. It was her mother, Rose. Ryder, she said, her voice shaking. This photo. When was it taken? Ryder leaned over, squinting at the image. About 15 years ago. That was a rescue up on Eagle Ridge. A group of hikers got lost and we brought them down. Why? Elise pointed to the woman. That's my mother. Ryder's eyes widened, and he took the album, staring at the photo. You're sure? Positive. She told me about that trip. It was right before she got sick, a rare weekend off. She said a rescue team found them when they got turned around. Elise's hands trembled. You saved her, Ryder. 15 years ago, you saved my mother. The revelation hung in the air, staggering in its weight. Ryder set the album down slowly, his expression a mix of shock and something deeper, awe, maybe, or disbelief. I had no idea. We rescued a lot of people back then. I didn't. She talked about it for months. Elise interrupted, tears streaming down her face. How kind the team was. How they made her feel safe. She said it reminded her why people were worth fighting for. And now you've saved me. Twice, in a way. Ryder's throat worked, and he looked away, his jaw tight. I didn't do anything special. Just my job. It was everything to her, Elise said fiercely. And it's everything to me. You gave her 2 more years, Ryder. 2 years where she saw me start my company, where we had time together. That's not nothing. Ryder's shoulders shook, and Elise realized he was crying, silent, wrenching sobs that spoke of years of guilt finally cracking open. She crossed to him, wrapping her arms around him, and he clung to her, the dam breaking. I thought I'd lost the right, he whispered. After Daniel, I thought I didn't deserve to save anyone. You've always deserved it, Elise said, her voice fierce. You saved my mother. You saved me. You're a hero, Ryder, even if you can't see it. They held each other as the storm outside gave way to pale sunlight breaking through the clouds. The revelation had shifted something fundamental between them, a thread that stretched back through time, binding their lives in ways neither had imagined. Fate, it seemed, had a long memory and a steady hand. The storm broke fully by the 3rd morning, leaving behind a world transformed, crystalline and bright, the mountains gleaming under a hard blue sky. Ryder managed to get a faint signal on his emergency radio, enough to call for a medevac for Greg. Within hours, a helicopter from the Pine Summit Rescue Service landed in a clearing near the cabin, and paramedics loaded Greg onto a stretcher. He was weak but stable, his gratitude evident as he clasped Ryder's hand. You saved my life, man, Greg said, his voice rough. I won't forget it. Ryder nodded, uncomfortable with the praise, and stepped back as the helicopter lifted off, its rotors kicking up a cloud of snow. Elise stood beside him, watching it disappear over the peaks, and felt a pang of anxiety. The outside world was rushing back in, her company, her responsibilities, the chaos she'd left behind. They'll be looking for me, she said quietly. My board, my team. I've been off the grid for 3 days. There's going to be fallout. Ryder glanced at her, his expression unreadable. You could call them. Let them know you're safe. I could, Elise agreed. But the thought filled her with dread, not relief. She'd spent 72 hours in this cabin, stripped of her titles and defenses, and she'd found something she hadn't expected. Peace, connection, a glimpse of a life beyond the grind. Going back felt like stepping into a cage. Ryder seemed to sense her hesitation. What do you want to do? I don't know, Elise admitted. Part of me wants to stay here, pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist. But I can't. I have obligations, people depending on me. Do they depend on you, or do you depend on them needing you? Ryder asked, his tone gentle but pointed. The question stung because it was true. Elise had built her identity around being indispensable, the CEO who never slept, never slowed. But what if she stepped back? What if she let someone else carry the weight for a while? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That afternoon, they hiked to the crash site. The storm had buried much of the wreckage, but the helicopter's tail jutted from a snowdrift like a monument to her hubris. Elise stood before it, her chest tight, and thought of how close she'd come to dying. The cold, the fear, the certainty that it was over. It all came rushing back. You okay? Ryder asked, his hand on her shoulder. Yeah, Elise said, though her voice wavered. It's just surreal seeing it. I was so focused on the meeting, on not failing, that I didn't see the danger. I almost threw my life away for a deal. But you didn't, Ryder said firmly. You're here. You get a second chance. What you do with it is up to you." Elise turned to him, the words settling deep. A second chance. She'd been given one, quite literally pulled from the jaws of death, and now she had to decide what it meant. Could she go back to the relentless pace, the endless pursuit of more? Or was this a turning point, a chance to build something different? They returned to the cabin as the sun dipped low, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Ryder built up the fire while Elise sat on the couch, her mind churning. She thought of her mother, of the photo, of the impossible thread that connected her to this man. It felt like destiny, or maybe just dumb luck. But either way, it mattered. "Ryder," she said, breaking the silence. "What you said about my mother, about me surviving instead of living. You were right. I've been so busy building a legacy that I forgot to build a life." Ryder looked up from the fire, his expression cautious. "So, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet," Elise said honestly. "But I think the first step is admitting I can't do it alone. I've been carrying this weight for 12 years, convinced that if I stop, everything will fall apart. But maybe it's okay to let go a little, to trust other people." "That's a start," Ryder said, sitting beside her. "But it's going to be hard. You've spent a long time in control. Letting go means being vulnerable, and that's scary." "You would know," Elise said with a faint smile. "You've been hiding up here for 7 years, convinced you don't deserve to save anyone. But you saved me, Ryder, and my mother. That has to count for something." Ryder's jaw tightened, and he looked away. "I don't know if I can go back to that life. Rescue work, the pressure, the risk of failing again." "I'm not asking you to," Elise said gently. "I'm just saying you're more than your guilt. You're a good man, Ryder. You deserve to forgive yourself." The words hung between them, heavy and earnest, and Ryder felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the knot he'd carried since Daniel's death. Elise's belief in him, her insistence that he was worthy, chipped away at the walls he'd built. But doubt crept in, a shadow over the fragile hope. "What if I can't?" he asked quietly. "What if I try and it all falls apart again?" "Then you'll have tried," Elise said. "That's more than hiding." They sat in silence, the fire crackling, and Elise felt the weight of her own words. She was asking Ryder to take a risk, to step out of his comfort zone. But was she willing to do the same? Could she walk away from quantum dynamics? Or at least step back and build a life that wasn't defined by her net worth? The doubt was real, gnawing at her resolve. She'd spent so long chasing success that the idea of slowing down felt like failure. But then she looked at Ryder, this man who'd saved her life without hesitation, who'd shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, and she felt a pull toward him, toward a different kind of future. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice small, "of what happens when I leave here, of going back to that world and losing what I found here." Ryder reached out, taking her hand. His palm was rough, calloused from years of hard work, but his grip was steady. "You don't have to lose it. You just have to fight for it." Elise squeezed his hand, tears prickling her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think she could balance both worlds, the company and this fragile, growing connection. But the fear of failure, of losing everything she'd built, loomed large. Outside, the mountains stood silent, indifferent to her struggle. But inside the cabin, warmth and possibility flickered like the fire, waiting to be fed or extinguished. The choice, as always, was hers. The fourth morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost cruel. The sky was a brilliant, unbroken blue, and the sun reflected off the snow with such intensity that it hurt to look directly at it. Elise stood on the cabin's small porch, a mug of coffee warming her hands, and stared out at the landscape that had nearly claimed her life. The beauty was undeniable, but so was the truth she'd been avoiding. She had to leave. Ryder's satellite phone had finally connected to a tower, and the messages had come flooding in. 47 voicemails from her executive team, 32 emails that had queued up and downloaded the moment she had signal, text messages from her board members ranging from concerned to furious. The investor deal had collapsed. The press was speculating about her disappearance. Quantum Dynamics stock had dropped 8% in 3 days. Her company was in freefall, and she was standing on a mountain drinking coffee. "You need to make the call," Ryder said from the doorway. He'd been watching her for the past 10 minutes, his expression unreadable. "I know," Elise said, but her fingers didn't move toward the phone in her pocket. "Elise." Ryder's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't hide from this. Whatever you decide about your life, your company, it starts with facing what's waiting for you down there." She turned to look at him, and the fear must have shown on her face because his expression softened. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. "These past few days, I felt more alive, more present than I have in years. The moment I make that call, it all comes crashing back. The pressure, the expectations, the endless race to stay on top. I don't know if I can do it anymore." Ryder stepped onto the porch, closing the distance between them. "Then don't, or do it differently. But you have to make a choice, and you have to own it. You can't live in this cabin forever, pretending the rest of the world doesn't exist." "Why not?" Elise asked, and she was only half joking. "You did. You've been hiding up here for 7 years." The words came out sharper than she intended, and Ryder flinched. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have been hiding. And look where it's gotten me. Alone, stuck in the past, convinced I don't deserve anything better. Is that really what you want?" Elise's throat tightened. "No. But I don't know how to do this, Ryder. I don't know how to be the person who built $1 billion company and the person who wants to stay here with you. Those two things don't fit together." "Maybe they don't have to," Ryder said. "Maybe you can be both, just in a different way. But first, you have to deal with what's in front of you. Make the call, Elise. Face it." She pulled out the phone, her hands trembling, and stared at the screen. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her like a physical force. She'd built Quantum Dynamics from nothing, poured everything she had into making it succeed. Walking away, even partially, felt like betraying her mother's memory, like admitting that all those years of sacrifice had been for nothing. But then she thought of the helicopter crash, of the cold seeping into her bones, of the absolute certainty that she was going to die alone on a mountain, having never really lived. She thought of her mother, Rose, who'd worked herself to death so Elise could have opportunities she'd never had. Would Rose really want this for her daughter? This hollow, exhausting existence in pursuit of a number that kept growing but never satisfied? With shaking fingers, Elise dialed her CFO, Michael Chen. He answered on the first ring. "Elise? Oh my God, Elise, where have you been? Are you okay? We've had search teams, the FAA, the press is going insane." "I'm fine, Michael," Elise interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "There was a helicopter crash. I've been stranded in the mountains, no communication. I'm safe now." "A crash? Jesus Christ." Are you hurt? Where are you? We'll send a helicopter immediately. I don't need a helicopter, Elise said. I need you to listen. What's the situation with the company? Michael launched into a rapid-fire briefing. The investor had pulled out, spooked by her disappearance and the lack of communication. 2 board members were calling for her resignation, citing instability in leadership. The press was running stories about her being missing, with speculation ranging from a mental breakdown to a secret rehab stint. The stock was recovering slightly now that word was spreading that she was alive. But the damage was significant. We need you back here, Michael said, his voice urgent. Today, if possible. We need to do damage control, reassure the investors, get ahead of the narrative. Every hour you're gone makes this worse. Elise closed her eyes, the familiar pressure building in her chest. This was it. The moment where she either ran back to the life she'd always known or stepped off the cliff into the unknown. She looked at Ryder, who was watching her with those steady gray eyes, and she felt something inside her snap. No, she said quietly. What? Michael's voice was sharp with disbelief. I said no, Michael. I'm not coming back today. Elise, you can't be serious. The company is in crisis. We need you. The company has survived 3 days without me, Elise said, her voice gaining strength. It can survive a few more. I need time, Michael. I need to think about what I want, what's best for quantum dynamics long term. I've been running on autopilot for 12 years, and it nearly killed me, literally. So I'm taking a week. You handle the press, you reassure the board, and you tell them I'm alive, and I'll be in touch. But I'm not coming back yet. A week? Elise, that's insane. You'll lose everything you've built. Then maybe I was building the wrong thing. The words exploded out of her, surprising them both. Elise took a shaky breath. Maybe I've been so focused on building an empire that I forgot to build a life. My mother died at 53, Michael. She never got to retire, never got to slow down, never got to just be. I'm 34 and I'm on the exact same path. So I'm pumping the brakes. 1 week, that's all I'm asking. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice quieter. Okay, 1 week. But Elise, please think about this carefully. You've worked so hard, I know. Elise said softly. That's exactly the problem. I'll call you in a few days. She hung up before he could respond and stood there, the phone in her hand, her heart pounding. She just walked away from her company in the middle of a crisis. It was irrational, irresponsible, completely unlike her, and it felt absolutely terrifying. You did it, Ryder said, and there was something like pride in his voice. I did it, Elise repeated. But instead of relief, she felt panic rising in her chest. Oh God, what did I just do? I just abandoned my company. I just walked away from everything I've built. Hey! Ryder caught her hands, grounding her. Breathe. You didn't abandon anything. You took time for yourself. That's not weakness. That's survival. But what if it all falls apart? Elise's voice cracked. What if the board votes me out? What if the stock crashes? What if I lose everything? Then you lose it, Ryder said simply. And you'll still be alive. You'll still be you. The company doesn't define you, Elise. It's something you built. But it's not who you are. How can you say that? Elise pulled away, her voice rising. You don't understand. That company is my mother's legacy. It's the only thing that gives meaning to her sacrifice. If I lose it, then what was it all for? Ryder's jaw tightened. Your mother didn't sacrifice so you could build a company. She sacrificed so you could live. And right now, You're not living. You're just existing in service to something that's eating you alive. You don't get to judge me. Elise shot back, anger flaring. You've been hiding in this cabin for 7 years, running from your past. At least I've been doing something with my life. Building something that matters. The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel, and Elise immediately regretted them. Ryder's expression shuddered, and he stepped back, his arms crossing over his chest. You're right, he said quietly. I have been hiding. And maybe that's why I can see what you're doing so clearly. You think if you run fast enough, work hard enough, build something big enough, it'll fill the hole your mother left. But it won't, Elise. Nothing will. You just have to learn to live with the hole. Elise felt tears streaming down her face. I don't know how. I don't know how to live with it without the work, without the constant motion. If I stop, if I slow down, all I feel is the emptiness. So feel it, Ryder said, his voice rough with emotion. Stop running from it. Sit with it. Let it hurt. Because on the other side of that hurt is the possibility of something real, something that actually fills you up instead of just distracting you from the pain. I'm scared, Elise whispered. I'm so scared that if I let go, even a little, I'll lose myself completely. Ryder pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against his chest, sobbing. All the grief she'd been holding back for 12 years came pouring out. For her mother, for the life she'd sacrificed, for the woman she'd become in pursuit of a goal that kept receding no matter how close she got. I've got you, Ryder murmured, his hand stroking her hair. I've got you. They stood there on the porch, the mountain wind cold against their skin, and Elise let herself break. She'd spent so long being strong, being in control, being the woman who had all the answers. But here in Ryder's arms, she could finally admit the truth. She was lost, and she didn't know the way forward. When the tears finally subsided, Elise pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry for what I said. You're not hiding, you're just... I am hiding, Ryder interrupted. You were right about that. I've been using Daniel's death as an excuse to avoid living, to avoid the risk of caring about someone and losing them again. But these past few days with you, they've shown me something. Maybe it's time I stopped punishing myself. Maybe it's time we both stopped. Elise looked up at him, seeing her own fear and hope reflected in his eyes. I don't know how to do this. Any of this. Neither do I, Ryder admitted. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together. The offer hung between them, fragile and profound. Elise wanted to say yes, wanted to leap into the unknown with this man who'd saved her life in more ways than one. But the fear was still there. A dark voice whispering that she was making a mistake, that she was throwing away everything she'd worked for. I need time, she said finally. I need to think. Ryder nodded, his expression understanding but guarded. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. But as Elise walked back into the cabin, leaving Ryder alone on the porch, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads, and the choice she made would determine not just her future, but the kind of person she would become. That night, Elise couldn't sleep. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling while the fire burned low in the wood stove. The cabin was quiet, except for the occasional pop of settling logs and the whisper of wind through the pines. Ryder had retreated to the back room hours ago, giving her space, but his absence felt like a weight on her chest. She thought about the phone call with Michael, about the fear in his voice, about the company teetering on the edge. Part of her wanted to call back, to say she'd changed her mind, that she'd be on the next flight to Seattle. But another part, a growing, insistent part. Knew that going back without changing anything would be a death sentence, just a slower one than hypothermia. At some point past midnight, Elise gave up on sleep and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, stepping out onto the porch. The night was clear and impossibly cold. The stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She'd never seen stars like this in the city. Light pollution washed them out, reduced them to a faint glow. But here, they were magnificent. She heard the cabin door open behind her and turned to find Ryder, also wrapped in a blanket, his hair mussed from sleep. "Couldn't rest either?" he asked. "Too much in my head," Elise admitted. "I keep running through scenarios, trying to find the path that doesn't end with me losing everything." Ryder leaned against the porch railing beside her. "Maybe you're asking the wrong question. Instead of, how do I not lose everything, maybe ask, what do I actually want to keep?" Elise considered this, her breath misting in the frozen air. "I want the company, I do. But I want it to be something that serves a purpose beyond just making money. When I started Quantum Dynamics, it was about creating security. For myself, for the people I employed. It was about proving that a girl from a trailer park could build something that mattered. But somewhere along the way, it became about the numbers, the valuations, the competition. I lost sight of why I started." "So go back to why," Ryder said simply. "Restructure, delegate, build the company you actually want, not the one everyone expects." "It's not that simple," Elise protested. "I have shareholders, a board, responsibilities." "You're the majority shareholder," Ryder interrupted. "I heard you talking to Michael. You have control, so use it. Yes, there will be pushback. Yes, some people will be angry. But if you've really built something strong, it'll survive you stepping back a little." Elise turned to look at him, this man who'd somehow seen through all her defenses to the core of who she was. "When did you get so wise about business?" Ryder smiled faintly. "I'm not wise about business. I'm wise about regret. I've spent 7 years living with it. And I can tell you, it's a hell of a lot heavier than taking a risk and failing." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Elise asked the question that had been haunting her. "What are you going to do? After I leave?" Ryder's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about that. What you said earlier about me hiding, it hit home. I've been telling myself I was content here, that I'd found peace. But the truth is, I've just been numb. These past few days, helping you, talking to you, it's reminded me what it feels like to actually care about something beyond just getting through the day." "So, what does that mean?" Elise asked, her heart beating faster. "It means I think it's time I stopped punishing myself for Daniel's death," Ryder said slowly. "I'm thinking about reaching out to my old team, seeing if there's a place for me in search and rescue again. Maybe not full-time, but enough to feel useful. Enough to honor what Daniel and I built together instead of running from it." Elise felt tears prick her eyes. "He'd be proud of you. For saving me, for deciding to come back." "Maybe," Ryder said. "Or maybe he'd kick my ass for taking 7 years to figure it out." He turned to face her fully. "But I couldn't have done it without you. You showing up, the crash, finding that photo of your mother. It was like the universe was giving me one more chance to get it right. And I don't want to waste it." The intensity in his voice made Elise's breath catch. "Ryder, I'm falling for you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, I know you have a whole life waiting for you in Seattle. But these past few days have meant something to me. You mean something to me. And I need you to know that before you leave." Elise's heart felt like it might burst out of her chest. She'd built walls around herself for so long, convinced that romantic love was a distraction she couldn't afford. Her one serious relationship had ended when her boyfriend admitted he was intimidated by her success, that he felt emasculated by her ambition. She decided then that relationships and empire building didn't mix, that she had to choose one or the other. But Ryder wasn't intimidated. He saw her ambition, her drive, her flaws, and he wasn't asking her to be smaller. He was asking her to be fuller, to make room for something beyond work. "I'm falling for you too," Elise whispered, the admission feeling like jumping off a cliff. "And it terrifies me. I don't know how to do this, Ryder. I don't know how to be a CEO and a person who has space in her life for love. I've spent 12 years convinced those two things were mutually exclusive. Maybe they don't have to be," Ryder said, stepping closer. "Maybe you've just been doing it wrong. What if instead of trying to do everything alone, you built a life where you had partners, in business and in life, who you actually trusted? What if you delegated the day-to-day operations to people who are good at their jobs and kept yourself focused on the big picture, the strategy, the vision? That's what CEOs are supposed to do anyway, right?" Elise stared at him, the idea taking root. She'd been so busy micromanaging every aspect of quantum dynamics, convinced that if she wasn't personally overseeing everything, it would fall apart. But what if that was just ego? What if her team was actually capable of running things without her constant intervention? "I'd have to restructure everything," she said slowly, thinking out loud. "Promote from within. Maybe bring in a COO to handle operations. I could focus on product development, on the innovation side. That's what I'm actually good at, what I actually enjoy. The rest of it, the meetings, the investor relations, the corporate politics, I hate all of that anyway." "So stop doing it," Ryder said. "Or do less of it. You're the boss. You get to decide what your job looks like." A laugh bubbled up from Elise's chest, surprising her. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Ryder acknowledged. "It's probably going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, letting go of that control. But I think you can do it. I think you're brave enough." Elise looked up at him. This man who'd pulled her from the snow, who'd seen her at her weakest and hadn't flinched, who'd challenged her to be better without asking her to be different. And she made a decision. "1 year," she said. Ryder's brow furrowed. "What?" "Give me 1 year," Elise said, the plan forming as she spoke. "I'll go back to Seattle. I'll restructure the company, delegate responsibility, build the team I should have built years ago. I'll keep my hand in the innovation side, but I'll step back from the day-to-day operations. And at the end of that year, if I've succeeded, if the company is stable and I've created space in my life, I want to come back here. To you, if you'll have me." Ryder's expression shifted through surprise, hope, and something that looked like joy. "1 year? You're serious?" "Dead serious," Elise said. "I need time to do this right, to not blow up everything I've built in a moment of panic. But I also need a goal, something to work toward. And that something is this, us. A life that's big enough for both ambition and love." "And what do I do for a year?" Ryder asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "You rebuild too," Elise said. "You reach out to your old team. You start taking rescues again. You prove to yourself that you're not defined by the one person you couldn't save, but by all the people you did. And then, when I come back, we see if we can build something together." Ryder pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. 1 year. I can do 1 year. Promise me something, Elise said, her voice catching. Promise me you won't wait for me to live. Promise me you'll actually build a life, not just mark time until I get back. I promise, Ryder said. If you promise me the same. Don't just work yourself to death in Seattle. Actually live. Take time off. Make friends. Let yourself be human. I promise, Elise said, and then she kissed him. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, two people testing the boundaries of something new. But then it deepened, became urgent, all the fear and hope and longing of the past few days pouring into it. Ryder's hands cupped her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses. And Elise felt herself melting into him, every wall she'd built crumbling. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. The first hint of dawn painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. 1 year, Elise repeated, committing it to memory. And then we see what we can build. 1 year, Ryder agreed and sealed it with another kiss. As the sun rose over the Cascades, two broken people stood on a cabin porch and made a promise to heal, separately and together. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better, a beginning. 3 days later, a helicopter from a private charter service landed in the clearing near Ryder's cabin. Elise stood on the porch. Dressed in clothes Ryder had driven into Pine Summit to buy for her, jeans, a warm sweater, boots that actually fit. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. She looked nothing like the polished CEO who'd boarded a helicopter in Seattle 5 days ago, and she felt like a completely different person. Ryder stood beside her, his hand in hers, neither of them quite ready to let go. You have everything? He asked. Though he'd watched her pack the small bag, she was leaving with less than she'd arrived with. Almost everything lost in the crash. Everything that matters, Elise said, squeezing his hand. She turned to face him, memorizing the details. The gray eyes, the strong jawline, the gentle smile that he reserved just for her. 1 year. 1 year, Ryder confirmed. I'll call you tonight, once you're settled. You better, Elise said, then kissed him one last time before forcing herself to walk toward the helicopter. The pilot, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, helped Elise aboard and then paused. You're her, aren't you? The CEO who survived the crash? I heard about it on the news. That's me, Elise admitted. My daughter works for Quantum Dynamics, the pilot said. In the Seattle office software engineer, she loves it there. Says it's the best job she's ever had. So thank you for building something that gave her a chance. Elise felt emotion swell in her chest. What's her name? Sarah Chen, the pilot said. Elise made a mental note. When she got back, she'd make sure to meet Sarah to thank her personally for her work. It was a small thing, but it was the kind of thing she'd stopped doing somewhere along the way. Connecting with the actual people who made her company run. As the helicopter lifted off, Elise looked down at Ryder, who stood watching with his hand raised in farewell. The cabin grew smaller, then disappeared among the trees, and Elise felt her throat tighten. But this wasn't goodbye forever. It was just the beginning. The flight to Seattle took less than 2 hours, and when the helicopter touched down at Boeing Field, Elise was met by Michael Chen and 2 members of her security team. Michael looked like he hadn't slept in days, his suit rumpled, his eyes shadowed with worry. Elise, thank God, he said, pulling her into an unexpected hug. Don't ever do that to me again. I'll try not to crash any more helicopters, Elise said dryly, and was rewarded with a weak laugh. The drive to Quantum Dynamics headquarters was filled with Michael's rapid-fire briefing. The stock had stabilized once news of her survival broke. The board meeting scheduled for tomorrow would be contentious, but he'd been working behind the scenes to shore up support. The press was clamoring for a statement. Elise listened, but her mind was already working through the restructuring plan she'd formulated during the long nights in Ryder's cabin. She'd made notes on paper. Ryder had an old notepad, and she pulled them out now, reviewing her strategy. "Michael, I need you to set up individual meetings with each board member before tomorrow's session," Elise said. "I'm going to propose some significant changes, and I want to get buy-in privately first." "What kind of changes?" Michael asked warily. "The kind where I step back from day-to-day operations and we promote a COO from within," Elise said calmly. "I'm thinking Director of Operations Sarah Whitmore. She's been with us for 8 years, knows every system inside and out, and has the respect of the entire management team." Michael's eyes widened. "You're serious? You're actually going to do it?" "I'm serious," Elise confirmed. "I started this company to create something meaningful, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what that meant. I've been micromanaging instead of leading, putting out fires instead of casting vision. That needs to change, and it starts with me trusting the incredible team we've built." Over the next week, Elise executed her plan with the same ruthless efficiency she'd once applied to corporate takeovers. She met with each board member individually, laying out her vision for a restructured leadership team. Some were skeptical, but most were supportive, especially when she explained that her focus would shift to product innovation and long-term strategy, the areas where she added the most value. The board meeting was tense, but ultimately successful. Sarah Whitmore was promoted to COO with a unanimous vote. 2 new vice presidents were appointed to handle investor relations and corporate communications, roles Elise had been shouldering herself. A succession plan was formalized, something the board had been requesting for years. "You're still the CEO," Michael reminded her after the meeting. "You're still in charge. You've just built a structure that doesn't require you to be superhuman." "Exactly," Elise said, feeling lighter than she had in years. But the real work was just beginning. Elise threw herself into rebuilding her company culture, starting with the things she'd neglected. She instituted mandatory vacation policies for senior leadership, herself included. She started having lunch in the employee cafeteria instead of eating at her desk. She created innovation labs where engineers could spend 20% of their time on passion projects. And she met Sarah Chen, the daughter of her helicopter pilot. Sarah was in her late 20s, bright-eyed and enthusiastic, working on encryption algorithms in the cybersecurity division. When Elise invited her to coffee, Sarah looked terrified. "You're not in trouble," Elise assured her with a smile. "I met your mother. She flew me back from the mountains after the crash. She told me you love working here, and I wanted to hear about your experience directly." Over coffee, Sarah opened up about her projects, her ideas for improving their security protocols, her dreams of eventually leading a team. Elise listened, asked questions, and by the end of the conversation, she'd promoted Sarah to lead a new initiative on quantum encryption, a project that would put her directly in line for a director role within 2 years. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked, overwhelmed. "I mean, I'm grateful, but you don't even know me." "Your mother saved my life by getting me home safely," Elise said. "But more than that, I've realized I've been so focused on the big picture that I've missed the individuals who make this company great. That changes now. You're talented, passionate, and you deserve a shot. Don't make me regret it." Sarah left the meeting walking on air, and Elise felt a satisfaction deeper than any stock price increase had ever provided. Word of Elise's transformation spread through quantum dynamics like wildfire. The CEO, who'd been untouchable, who'd worked 18-hour days and expected the same from everyone else, was suddenly visible, approachable, human. Morale soared, productivity increased, and perhaps most surprisingly, profits grew as innovation flourished in the space Elise's micromanagement had previously stifled. 3 months after the crash, Elise received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Porter, this is Harold Whitman. I don't know if you remember me, but 15 years ago I was part of a hiking group that got lost on Eagle Ridge. A search and rescue team found us, brought us down safely. There was a young woman in our group, Rose Porter. I believe she was your mother." Elise's breath caught. "Yes, she was. How did you find me?" "I saw the news about your helicopter crash, about the man who saved you," Harold said. "And it got me thinking about that rescue all those years ago. I did some digging, found out that Ryder Maxwell was on the team that saved us. I wanted you to know that your mother talked about that rescue for months afterward. She said it restored her faith in human kindness, that there were still people who helped others without expecting anything in return. She was so proud of you, Miss Porter. I met her a few times after that before she passed. She always said you were going to change the world." Elise felt tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for telling me that. You have no idea how much I needed to hear it. I think your mother would be proud of what you've built," Harold continued. "But I also think she'd want you to have what she never did, a life outside of work. Don't make the same mistakes she did, working yourself to death. You've got time. Use it." After she hung up, Elise sat in her office and cried. For her mother, for the years she'd wasted chasing an impossible goal, for the grace of a second chance. Then she picked up the phone and called Ryder. "Hey," his voice came through, warm and familiar. "How's the corporate world treating you?" "Better than expected," Elise said. "I just had the most incredible conversation. Someone who was rescued with my mother 15 years ago called. He said she talked about that rescue for months, that it gave her hope." "That's what good rescues do," Ryder said quietly. "They remind people that someone cares, that they're not alone." "How are things there?" Elise asked. "Have you reached out to your old team yet?" "I did," Ryder said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Had coffee with my former captain last week. They've got a spot for me if I want it, part-time to start. I'm thinking about taking it." "You should," Elise encouraged. "You're too good at it not to." "Maybe," Ryder said. "Or maybe I'm just ready to stop hiding. Either way, I've got you to thank for pushing me." They talked for an hour, sharing the small details of their separate lives. Her restructuring efforts, his first rescue simulation training, the cookbook he was attempting to work through, the business book she was reading about sustainable growth. It was mundane and perfect, the kind of conversation that built relationships brick by brick. As Elise hung up and looked out her office window at the Seattle skyline, she felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years. Contentment. Not the frantic high of closing a deal or the hollow satisfaction of hitting a revenue target, but genuine peace. She still had 9 months before her year was up. 9 months to prove she could build a company and a life. 9 months to become the person who deserved the second chance she'd been given. And she was determined not to waste a single day. 11 months later, Elise Porter stood in the departure terminal at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport a single carry-on bag slung over her shoulder and a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt since before her mother died. The past year had been a whirlwind of transformation. Restructuring quantum dynamics, learning to delegate, building actual friendships with her leadership team. And most importantly, learning to live instead of just survive. The company had thrived under the new structure. Sarah Whitmore had proven to be an exceptional COO, handling operations with a steady hand that freed Elise to focus on innovation and strategy. The quantum encryption project led by Sarah Chen had just secured a major government contract. Stock prices had reached an all-time high, and employee satisfaction surveys showed record levels of engagement. But more than the metrics, Elise had changed. She took weekends off now. She had dinner with friends, actual friends, not just business contacts. She'd started painting again, a hobby from college she'd abandoned as frivolous. She'd visited her mother's grave for the first time in 5 years and finally said the things she'd been too afraid to say. And through it all, Ryder had been her anchor. They'd talked almost every night, video calls that stretched long into the evening as they shared their days, their fears, their victories. She'd watched him rebuild his confidence, taking on more complex rescues, mentoring new team members, slowly forgiving himself for Daniel's death. He'd watched her transform from a woman drowning in her own ambition to someone who actually knew how to breathe. Now, as she boarded the plane to Boise, the closest major airport to Pine Summit, Elise felt the butterflies of anticipation mixed with nerves. A year was a long time. People changed. What if the connection they'd built in the intensity of the crisis didn't translate to normal life? What if she'd built this entire year around a fantasy? But as the plane lifted off, she pushed the doubts away. They'd made a promise to each other, and she was going to keep it. The flight was short, and Elise rented a car for the 2-hour drive to Pine Summit. The mountain road wound through forests that were just beginning to show the colors of early autumn, and she found herself smiling at the memory of the last time she'd been in these mountains. Cold, terrified, certain she was going to die. What a difference a year made. She'd told Ryder she was coming today, but not the exact time, wanting to surprise him. As she pulled into the small parking area near his cabin, she saw smoke rising from the chimney and his truck parked out front. Her heart hammered as she climbed out of the car and walked toward the door. Before she could knock, it swung open, and there he was. Ryder looked good. Better than good. He'd filled out slightly, the gauntness of grief replaced by the solid strength of someone who'd found purpose again. His hair was a little longer, and his eyes crinkled with genuine happiness when he saw her. "You're early," he said, his voice warm with delight. "I couldn't wait," Elise admitted. And then she was in his arms, and nothing else mattered. They held each other for a long moment, neither speaking, just absorbing the reality of being together again after a year of phone calls and video chats. When they finally pulled apart, Ryder cupped her face, searching her expression. "You look different," he said softly, lighter. "I feel different," Elise said. "I did what I promised. I rebuilt the company, built a team I can actually trust, and I built a life, a real one. And now I'm here, if you'll still have me." "If I'll still have you?" Ryder laughed, pulling her close again. "Elise, I've been counting down the days." They spent the afternoon catching up properly, walking through the forest as Ryder showed her the trails he guided tourists on, the spots where he'd performed rescues over the past year. He told her about Daniel's memorial he'd finally built, a simple plaque near the site of the avalanche, inscribed with the words, "He taught me to climb, I'll teach others to fly." "It's how I made peace with it," Ryder explained as they stood before the plaque. I can't bring him back, can't change what happened. But I can honor him by being the kind of person he believed I was. Someone who helps people, who doesn't give up, who sees the good in others even when they can't see it themselves. Elise squeezed his hand. He'd be proud of you. I'm proud of you. That evening, Ryder cooked dinner. Something he'd gotten significantly better at over the year, he claimed with a grin. As they ate, Elise told him about quantum dynamics, about Sarah Whitmore's leadership, about the innovations they were pioneering, about the company culture that had shifted from cutthroat to collaborative. I used to think success meant being indispensable, Elise said. But I've learned that real success is building something strong enough to thrive without you. The company doesn't need me to survive anymore. It needs me to dream, to push boundaries, to imagine what's possible. And that's so much more fulfilling than micromanaging every decision. So what's next? Ryder asked. You've got the company running smoothly. What do you want now? Elise took a deep breath. This was the conversation she'd been both anticipating and dreading. I want to split my time. 3 weeks a month in Seattle, focusing on strategy and innovation. 1 week here with you, learning to slow down, to appreciate the mountains, to be present. And eventually, maybe we build something here together. A retreat center, maybe, where executives can come and learn survival skills. Disconnect from technology. Remember what it means to be human. Ryder's eyes lit up. A retreat center? That's actually brilliant. Combine wilderness training with leadership development. Exactly, Elise said, excitement building. You teach the survival skills, the self-reliance, the trust building that comes from depending on a team in challenging situations. I bring the business framework, the corporate contacts, the funding. We create something that changes lives, not just balance sheets. When do we start? Ryder asked, and Elise's heart soared. How about tomorrow? She suggested. We could scout locations, start planning. I've already talked to my board about it. They're supportive, especially since it aligns with our corporate social responsibility initiatives. Ryder pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. A year ago, I saved your life. But you saved mine right back. You reminded me that I was more than my worst moment, that I deserved to live fully instead of just existing. I love you, Elise Porter. I think I have since the moment I pulled you out of that snow. I love you too, Elise whispered. You taught me that success isn't measured in dollars or deals, but in connections, in purpose, in the lives we touch. My mother would have liked you. She would have loved what we're building. They kissed as the fire crackled in the wood stove, and the mountains stood silent, witness outside. Two broken people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. Who'd chosen healing over hiding, hope over fear, love over loneliness. The next morning, Elise woke early and stepped onto the cabin porch with her coffee, watching the sun rise over the Cascades. The peaks were bathed in gold and pink, and she thought of the night she'd almost died here. The cold seeping into her bones, the certainty that it was over. But it hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. Ryder joined her, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Below them, Pine Summit was beginning to wake. Smoke rising from chimneys, the distant sound of a truck starting, the simple rhythms of a small mountain town. You know what I realized? Elise said softly. That helicopter crash was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to stop running, to face what I'd been avoiding, to build a life worth living. Funny, Ryder said with a slight smile. I was just thinking the same thing. That storm brought you to me, and you brought me back to myself. Do you think it was fate? Elise asked. The crash, my mother being rescued by you 15 years ago, all of it leading to this moment? Ryder considered the question. Maybe. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe when you put kindness out into the world, it comes back to you. I saved your mother, not knowing it mattered. You pushed me to forgive myself, not knowing how much I needed it. We saved each other. That's not fate. That's just what happens when good people refuse to give up on themselves or each other. Elise leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. She thought of her mother, of Daniel, of all the people who'd shaped them and left too soon. But she also thought of Sarah Chen, of Harold Whitman, of the countless lives they'd both touched through their work and their choices. Here's to second chances, Elise said, raising her coffee mug. Ryder clinked his mug against hers. And to building something beautiful with him. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the mountains in brilliant light, Elise Porter and Ryder Maxwell stood together on the threshold of a new chapter. Behind them were the scars of loss and the lessons of survival. Ahead was the promise of partnership, purpose, and a love forged in the crucible of crisis and strengthened by the choice to be vulnerable, to be brave, to be fully, magnificently alive. The mountains had nearly claimed her life. Instead, they'd given her a reason to live, and that made all the difference. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.